Distinguished delegates, I would like to call this meeting to order. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a virtual informal session in preparation for the third meeting of a subsidiary body on implementation. Yesterday, we successfully launched our informal session and we heard a wide range of views and perspectives. I am confident that we can continue our success at today's meeting as well and continue to advance the work of the SBI. Before we begin, I will give the floor to the Secretariat for some technical reminders. Secretariat, you have the floor.
If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone. The status bar will turn red on your computer and you may wish to start speaking immediately. If the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so that the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone. If any party encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication and therefore to keep your remarks here very short. The time for statements is limited to 3 minutes for parties and 5 minutes for regional groups. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time, but please do not speed up your reading as it will be challenging for the interpreters to follow you. Please note that towards the mid-session, the chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need for you to log off during this time. As you know, the CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitate the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. A 6-minute instructional video explaining both how to upload statements and how our online conference system works is being played during the break, as well as just before we convene each morning. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the statement that is uploaded. Participants are encouraged to allow their statements to be posted on the meeting page. Please note that statements will be posted online on the meeting page once they have been delivered by the respective parties and registered observers, subject to the agreement of the parties and observers concerned. The website will be updated accordingly each day. Statements will not be posted in advance of delivery. However, once the agenda item is complete, in the case that not all statements of observers are presented orally because of lack of time, those statements that have been provided in good time will be posted, again, subject to the agreement of the observer concerned. We urge you to please upload any statements as soon as possible to help with the interpretation and the smooth running of this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. We will now look at Agenda Item 4 on assessment and review of effectiveness of a Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. I request the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this agenda item 4. Secretariat, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Article 35 of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety requires that the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties, undertake a periodic evaluation of the effectiveness of the protocol. In its decision CP96, the meeting of the parties decided that the fourth assessment and review of the Cartagena Protocol would be combined with the final evaluation of the protocol strategic plan for the period 2011-2020. The meeting of the parties to the protocol requested the Executive Secretary to analyze and synthesize information on the implementation of the protocol. It requested the Liaison Group and the Compliance Committee to contribute to the fourth assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan, and to submit their conclusions for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation at its third meeting. The meeting of the parties requested the subsidiary body on implementation to consider the information provided and the conclusions reached by the Liaison Group and the Compliance Committee, and to submit its findings and recommendations to the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the protocol at its 10th meeting, with a view to facilitating the fourth assessment and review and final evaluation of the strategic plan. Document CBD/SBI/3/3 provides in Section 2 an overview of the process for the fourth assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan. Section 3 contains a summary of progress under the different thematic areas of the strategic plan. Section 4 presents suggested elements for a recommendation. The conclusions from the Compliance Committee and the Liaison Group are provided in Annexes 1 and 2 respectively, and were used to develop the elements for a recommendation in Section 4. The full analysis of information is provided in document CBD/SBI/3/3 add 1. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for intervention on item 4. As this item is under the Cartagena Protocol, I will first call on parties to the Cartagena Protocol, followed by other parties to the Convention, non-parties, and then observers. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated. The status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. I will start with interventions by the regions, and I will take the first intervention from the African region. And I understand that Malawi will speak on behalf of African region. Malawi, if you can please press on your raise hand button. I see you have done that. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi is pleased to lead this statement on behalf of the African Group and would like to commend the work done thus far through various processes during the current intersectional period, including the input to the fourth assessment and the review of the Cartagena Protocol and the final evaluation of the 2011-2020 strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol by the Compliance Committee and the Liaison Group on the Cartagena Protocol, and the associated analysis of information on the 12 thematic areas, which together provide description of the status, trend, and the implementation of the protocol and the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol. Africa welcomes the inclusion of the biosafety target in the post-2020 biodiversity framework and views it as a vehicle for mainstreaming biosafety into the national planning process, including the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. In this way, the protocol and its implementation plan and the capacity building action plan would be relevant to the achievement of the 3 objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And consequently, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will contribute to the implementation of and compliance with the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Regarding the establishment of the functional national biosafety framework, Africa notes with concern that just over a half of the parties have fully introduced the necessary legal, administrative, and other measures to implement their obligation under the protocol. This has also impacted on the full and effective implementation of the protocol, and the very concerning is the reported limited progress in this regard since the midterm evaluation of the strategic plan. This observation is partly attributed to inadequate financial resources. Africa therefore wishes to highlight the importance of allocating a dedicated biosafety window under the Global Environment Facility as a financial mechanism to support the follow-up of the biosafety implementation plan and the capacity building action plan. Um, Africa therefore supports the recommendation to invite Global Environment Facility to continue to assist eligible parties in undertaking priority activities to support the implementation plan of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. In addition, support from other government donors, biosafety capacity building initiative would be critical in complementing national budgets, strengthening human capacity resource capacities, facilitating access to sufficient financial resources and adequate technical infrastructure toward enhancing the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. Coordination and cooperation would be required to leverage available resources, draw on synergies, and to avoid duplication. With regards to socioeconomic consideration, Africa agrees on the need to encourage parties to cooperate on research and information exchange on any socioeconomic consideration impacts on living modified organisms, especially on indigenous and local communities, in accordance with Article 26. Africa, however, wishes to point out that the recommendation made reference to paragraph 1 of Article 26 of the protocol instead of paragraph 2, and this must be corrected. In agreeing with the identified capacity area needs, Africa wishes to propose capacity strengthening for socio-economic consideration as an addition on the list. Africa is happy with the observed positive trends regarding information sharing on the biosafety clearinghouse, and this was substantially achieved by continuous support made through the UNEP JEP project for sustainable capacity building for effective participation in the BCH, which we greatly recommend and appreciate. However, it is important not only to make available the required information to the BCH, but also to keep existing records up to date. In addition, there is also need for prioritization of better communication and information sharing among parties on other relevant topics such as materials for public awareness, education, participation, and participation through the BCH. Chair, Africa wishes to stress the importance of inclusion of the implementation plan for the protocol elements of the 2011-2020 strategic plan, and that are still relevant, along with new elements from lesson learned from the implementation of the 2011-2020 strategic plan. Furthermore, Africa wishes to emphasize on the need to include new development relevant to biosafety and questions designed to elicit information on indicators for the implementation of the capacity building plan and capacity and in the reporting format for the fifth national report on the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Lastly, Africa also agrees with the recommendation to conduct a midterm evaluation of the implementation plan and the capacity building action plan in conjunction with the fifth assessment and review of the importance of giving adequate attention to the development of a specific implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol as a follow-up to the 2011-2020 strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol and the capacity building action plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Malava, speaking on behalf of the African region. And now continue with the regions. I understand from the Central and East European region, Belarus. If you can please raise your hand. Belarus, you have the floor. Belarus, go ahead. You have the floor.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. CE region welcomes the conclusion reached by the Compliance Committee and the liaison group for the Cartagena Protocol. As well as where appropriate, we request the Executive Secretary to provide an update to the analysis, considering also additional forced national reports that may be received, and make this update available to the Conference of the Parties, serving as a meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol at its 10th meeting. We would like to thank the Convention for building capacity aimed to enhance synergy between the Convention and its protocols for the period 2011-2020. In particular, we would like to note that Belarus and Moldova, CE countries, have successfully participated in the implementation of the pilot project of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, capacity building to promote the integrated implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and the Convention on Biological Diversity at the national level, that strengthened the capacity of 10 countries in developing and testing of practical actions enabling to promote the integrated implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety and the Convention on Biological Diversity. In the course of the project implementation, desk studies were carried out, and the report was prepared with a view of promoting biosafety issues at the national level. We would like to emphasize the importance of capacity building in this area for the region in the post-2020 period as well. National reports on implementation of the Cartagena Protocol are an important mechanism to monitor the effectiveness of its implementation. The countries of the CE region thank UNEP-JEF for the assistance provided in their preparation. Such assistance is very important, allowing to gather all the stakeholders in the field of LMO safety and organized a number of events. This format for the preparation of the above-mentioned national reports allows not only the most comprehensive collection of information and the timely submission of their national reports, but also strengthening intersectoral communication of all the stakeholders, as well as developing or adjusting plans for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol, which is especially important now, when we are developing post-2020 plans for the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. We are also grateful for the development of guidelines for the detection and risk assessment of LMOs and the consideration of socioeconomic issues related to their use, thus building the capacity of the region. Alongside with that, we would like to emphasize that in connection with the emergence of new types of LMOs, especially object of synthetic biology, LMOs developed using engineered gene-drive techniques, as well as due to the fact that different countries have different opportunities for the detection and identification, the assessment and risk management of LMOs, addressing socioeconomic issues and problems related to digital information and genetic resources, the countries of the Central and Eastern Europe also confirmed the urgent need for capacity building on these issues in accordance with the guidelines developed under the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. This will enhance cooperation between the countries in the field of biosafety, both within and between regions. In conclusion, we would like to draw your attention to the fact that scarce consideration is given to the issues related to the financial support to regional cooperation on biosafety. In 2018, Belarus, for example, submitted to the BioBridge initiative the project establishment of the CE regional network of laboratories for detection of LMOs and the centers of excellence, which passed into the second round and received positive feedbacks from reviewers, but there were no funds for its implementation. A notification was received that the funds would be sought, but it failed to be the case in 2018. But such cooperation between the countries is absolutely necessary in the context of the rapid growth of activity in the field of genetic engineering. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belarus, on behalf of the CE region. And finally, on my list for the regions, I have a request on floor from Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The EU and its member states wish to thank the Secretary for the synthesis and analysis of information for the fourth assessment and review and final evaluation of the strategic plan for the period 2011-2020, based on the available information. Likewise, we wish to thank the Compliance Committee and the Liaison Group for their contribution. The analysis reveals positive and promising developments in several implementation areas. Several goals of the strategic plan are close to accomplishment. However, too many crucial areas of implementation raise concern. First and foremost, the alarming high number of parties that still need to fully put in place a functioning biosafety framework calls for action. In our view, the full implementation in all parties to the protocol is of utmost importance. It should receive highest priority. The required action includes, but is not limited to, sufficient and specific capacity building. The fact that only 99 fourth national reports were available at the cutoff date for the review and evaluation weakens the analysis validity. We would like to recall that the fourth national report shall build the basis for the post-2020 working period until 2030. Against this background, the EU and its member states emphasize the need for an update analysis once 80% of the parties have submitted their fourth national reports, preferably prior to COPMOB 10. We wish to underline the importance of a biosafety component in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, as well as the importance of an implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol and a capacity building action plan that address the parties' needs and challenges. The EU and its member states would like to highlight the positive developments regarding information sharing on the biosafety clearinghouse. The BCH is a widely accepted platform for information sharing and knowledge management and for supporting capacity building. An increasing number of parties have trained staff available and submit complete information. Capacities are rising, and an increasing number of forums and discussions with broader participation are conducted. These developments reflect the important role of the BCH as a core element of the protocol. Further, while we consider the entry into force of the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol in 2018 a big step forward, the high number of parties to the Cartagena Protocol that have not yet ratified the Supplementary Protocol are a matter of concern that requires immediate action. Let me assure you that the European Union and its member states stand ready and committed to working hard with you and all our colleagues toward a full implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and its supplementary protocol. We agree with the general direction of the draft recommendations prepared by the Secretariat. We will submit in writing our minor suggested amendments to the Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. I will now open the floor for interventions by parties to the Cartagena Protocol. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list, and when I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated. The status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. I will take the first intervention from Norway, followed by UK and Uganda. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Norway supports the proposals for decision for all thematic areas in the analysis performed as part of the assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol. Topics of special interest for Norway, and that has been the focus of our work under the protocol, are risk assessment and risk management, socio-economic considerations, capacity building, and implementation of the protocol. In addition, we would like to emphasize the importance for more parties to ratify the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol and to encourage further information sharing through the Biosafety Clearinghouse. Norway stresses the importance of thorough risk assessments and proper risk management of living modified organisms, and support the need mentioned by parties of further capacity building work to strengthen experience on risk assessment and risk management, including on the use of available guidance documents. In regards to socio-economic considerations, in line with other parties, Norway sees the need for more research to be performed in this field, both local and international studies, to promote further development of a methodological framework defining appropriate socio-economic indicators and rules for data collection. Further work to fully take the necessary measures to implement the protocol by all parties is of high importance to Norway, and we strongly support the work undertaken by the Compliance Committee to address compliance issues and their role in the progress of implementation of the protocol by parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I now give the floor to, I think, UK first and then Uganda. UK, you had the floor, followed by Uganda and Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The UK would like to thank all those that have been involved in the assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, particularly those involved in the work of the Compliance Committee and the Liaison Group on the Cartagena Protocol. The assessment is comprehensive, drawing on data from the 4th National Assessment Reports, the final evaluation of the strategic plan, the Biosafety Clearinghouse, and experience gained from capacity building projects. The Cartagena Protocol on biosafety continues to provide a mechanism for safe transboundary movement of living modified organisms. The Biosafety Clearinghouse provides an effective notification and information sharing system for risk assessment and import decisions. The UK acknowledges the suggested recommendations in paper CBD/SBI/3/3 as a useful basis from which to continue discussions about the continued implementation of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. We are pleased to note the progress made in the African regions with respect to an increase against the baseline in the introduction of measures necessary for the implementation of the protocol. We also note there are still a number of parties who have not yet implemented national biosafety frameworks. The implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol, in conjunction with the action plan for capacity building, should ensure that support is made available to those parties for whom it is a challenge to access sufficient financial resources and adequate technical infrastructure in order to fulfil their obligations under the protocol. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. I now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Brazil and Thailand. Uganda, you have the floor. Uganda, are you on the line? No? Okay, then I continue the list. Brazil, you have the floor, followed by Thailand and China.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll make some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil, and our official position will be presented at the formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil welcomes the comprehensive analysis on the implementation and effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol, presented in document SBI/3/3, and we appreciate the contributions of the liaison group and the compliance committee as well. At the same time, Brazil remains concerned over the lack of progress in addressing capacity building needs and gaps. Thus, instead of addressing capacity building issues in one single section, namely Section B, on coordination and support, it would be better to identify capacity gaps across other sections of the recommendations, according to the priority areas mentioned in paragraph 12. Regarding recommendations on risk assessment, Brazil understands that they should emphasize the importance of compliance with Annex 3 of the protocol, which remains the major framework to identify and evaluate the potential adverse effects of living modified organisms. Given the voluntary nature of additional guidance materials, we should reconsider including reference to those materials as a measure of progress in this item. With reference to LMOs or traits that may have adverse effects, Brazil believes corresponding recommendations should be based on the framework provided by Article 16 of the Protocol. In this regard, it is essential to highlight the need to strengthen cooperation among parties. We should also bear in mind that Article 16 does not address detecting and monitoring activities. Finally, we would like to recall the recommendations on socioeconomic considerations should stress the voluntary nature of obligations under Article 26 of the Protocol and take into account different national circumstances and capabilities. We appreciate this opportunity to present our preliminary views and we look forward to discussing this topic on the formal face-to-face session. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to Thailand, followed by China and Ecuador. Thailand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From this viewpoint, Thailand basically welcomes the document undertaken by the Compliance Committee and Liaison Group on Cartagena Protocol in producing the fourth assessment report on the implementation of Cartagena Protocol and on bird safety and its strategic plan 2011 to 2020 as a part of Agenda Item 4 and welcome the report and its findings. Thailand recognizes that the implementation of the strategic plan for Cartagena Protocol will contribute to achievement of the CBD and Cartagena Protocol objectives. We would like to encourage parties to the protocol to put in place legal, administrative, and other measures to implement the obligation under the protocol, in particular biosafety legislation, taking into account the national circumstance, as a tool in implementing the protocol. Madam Chair, Thailand concerned that capacity building is the need action, especially on the risk assessment and management, monitoring and identification of living modified organisms, communication, public awareness, and participation with all relevant sectors, as well as the dissemination of update and required information through biosafety clearinghouse. Those actions require sufficient financial support from relevant sources and funds to strengthen capacity and contribute further work. Finally, we believe that lessons learned and experience from the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol will be included in the preparation of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to fulfill the gap of implementation of the protocol. We will submit our statement in writing to Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Thailand. I now give the floor to China, followed by Ecuador and Uganda. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席女士。
Madam Chair. China thanks the Secretariat, the Compliance Committee, and the Liaison Group for their work on the fourth assessment and review of the Cartagena Protocol and the final assessment of the 2011 to 2020 strategic plan of the protocol. The report adopts a scientific method to objectively evaluate the effectiveness of the protocol and provides a comprehensive reference for the parties to understand the implementation of the protocol. China submitted its 4th national report to the convention. Secretariat in 2011, while preparing the report, recommendations and suggestions from more than 20 departments and units were collected, reflecting China's achievements, experience, and remaining problems. We are pleased to find that in this assessment report, some progress has been made in certain thematic area of the protocol strategic plan, such as risk assessment and risk management, detection and identification of LMOs that may have adverse effects, handling transportation, packaging, and identification, as well as transboundary movements and emergency measures. In the meantime, it is also noted that there are still some areas where progress is limited, such as taking necessary legal, administrative, and other measures and submitting national reports with a prescribed time. Therefore, China proposes to invite GEF and other potential funders in accordance with the further funding needs determined by this resolution to provide eligible parties with necessary assistance in preparing national reports, making and enforcing law, administrative, and other measures to implement the protocol and improve capacity building. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I now give the floor to Ecuador, followed by Uganda and Colombia. Ecuador, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ecuador wishes to thank the Secretariat and the Compliance Committee and also the liaison group on the Cartagena Protocol for having done everything that was necessary to develop the document. Full implementation of the Cartagena Protocol will allow us to meet the CDB objectives and take national measures based on scientifically sound knowledge. In this context, the implementation of the strat plan on the Cartagena Protocol has caused us some difficulties. Unfortunately, the speaker has been lost. We've lost the connection. It's come back in order to reach a regulatory progress, such as setting up our National Committee on Biosafety for intersectoral implementation of the protocol. So at a national level, we're developing better understanding with all of the stakeholders, including when it comes to awareness raising. And we've taken important action when it comes to public perception, and we've generated basic information with national surveys, such as a national study on public perception of biotechnology and LMOs and biosafety in general. In the near future, there will also be online training modules so that people can have better understanding and we can raise awareness about all of these different issues at a regional, national and international level. There's progress with biosafety, and so there's regulatory challenges attached to this. So we have to increase funding and scientific cooperation and capacity building and technology transfer in order to have effective regulation of the LMOs and to fully meet with the Cartagena Protocol and the CBD objectives. So we'd like to call on our development partners so that we can have better cooperation on this matter. Ecuador would like to say that this is a preliminary set of comments, and we will hand out our comments when we have the formal SBI-3 meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ecuador. I will now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Colombia. I note that Uganda, you need to activate your microphone and camera at the upper left corner of a screen. If you please can activate your microphone and camera. You found a button in the upper left corner of the screen. Yes, Uganda, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda appreciates the submission of Malawi on behalf of the African region, and Uganda appreciates the analysis of information for the fourth assessment and review of the protocol and final evaluation of the strategic plan for the protocol for the period 2011 to 2020. Uganda also appreciates the input to the fourth assessment and review of the Cartagena Protocol, and final evaluation of the strategic plan for the same period. And Ghana recognizes the post-2020 global biodiversity framework can ably contribute to the implementation of and compliance with the protocol on biosafety, and acknowledges the relevance of the protocol and its implementation and capacity building action plan to the achievement of the 3 objectives of CBD. Uganda therefore reiterates the need to align the structure of the Cartagena Protocol strategic plan to the post-2020 biodiversity framework. The protocol responds to the sustainable utilization of biodiversity in this regard and could be incorporated into the framework under this broad objective. And Uganda has made a number of strides in establishing functional administrative arrangements by establishing staff, and the new implementation plan will therefore need to support national plans for implementation of the protocol strategic plan. The new implementation will therefore need to consider inclusion of mechanisms for developing the end sub-targets and integrating these. And there is equally need to develop a resource mobilization component for biosafety that will include specific resources set aside, as well as voluntary commitment for additional resources. Capacity building for biosafety is unique and has a number of components relating to infrastructure, and there is a need to develop a program of work that responds to the operation aspects of the protocol. Uganda equally has put in place a number of programs that offer biosafety training, but then reiterates that public awareness is important for the implementation of this plan. There is need to prioritize issues of scientific and technical cooperation that should be included in the implementation of the plan, and should be on enhancing regional capacity for implementation of the protocol on biosafety. Uganda has overall supports the elements of the draft recommendation and has submitted the detailed statement to the website. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Yes, I now see Colombia. You are finally on my list of parties to the Cartagena Protocol. So, Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Colombia, thank you, Madam Chair. Colombia tiene los siguientes comentarios.
Colombia has the following initial comments that will be further expanded at the SBI-3 formal meeting. The implementation plan should concentrate its actions on strengthening capacity to ensure an adequate level of protection as regards the safe transfer, handling. I'm afraid we've lost the speaker.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you again. Please go ahead.
Sorry.
So, the implementation plan should concentrate its actions on strengthening capacity to ensure an adequate level of protection as regards the safe transfer, handling and use of LMOs, i.e. discussions should continue to be focused on LMOs and the production of scientifically sound risk assessments for the safe use and handling of LMOs, rather than concentrating on technologies used to obtain these. When it comes to resource mobilization, it's key that this should not be limited to government sources. Rather, it should consider leveraging resources from all sources, including international cooperation and the private sector. On the table in the appendix, Colombia has the following initial complementations. This refers to implementation. First of all, in areas of implementation, Colombia believes that we should assess the relevance of including Objective A.9, since socioeconomic considerations should not be a mechanism that detract from a risk assessment results based on objective, sound and scientific criterion. Also, socioeconomic considerations could have an impact on the certainty of trade flows, which could imply that we would be going beyond the jurisdiction of the protocol. Turning now to the enabling environment, availability resources B.2 is critical for developing the protocol's activities, notwithstanding the fact that the capacities of developing countries do vary in terms of the national priorities. In Colombia's case, our priorities are those provisions that require mandatory compliance under the protocol. So given this, for Colombia, objective B.4 on increasing international cooperation is very relevant. Nevertheless, this cooperation should remain flexible and unconditional, taking account of the national priorities of the recipient. Agrees with the spirit of Objective B.3. However, public consultation on its use is a national provision and is in keeping with specific legislation and circumstances. Lastly, we wish to comment on the process for producing the fourth national reports on the Cartagena Protocol, where we did not manage to gain access to the GEF enabling activities resources for production of our fourth report. As of 2019, important steps were undertaken by the GEF focal points together with the implementing agency, UNEP, and the GEF Secretariat. However, it was not possible to gain access to resources to produce this report. That is why the final recommendation to countries was to move towards
connectivity problem. Sorry, I will finish right now. Sin embargo,
However, the final recommendation to countries was to move towards producing the reports with their own resources, which led to significant delays in submitting the fourth report. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Iran. You have the floor.
Good time, everybody. Madam Chairperson, Islamic Republic of Iran would like to thank the Executive Secretary for its continued efforts in tracking and providing assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety as presented in document CBD/SBI-3/3. I also wish to thank Compliance Committee and the Liaison Group on Cartagena Protocol for their contribution. The report seems, however, somehow has room for more improvement. Overall, we would like to welcome the suggested text, and we will provide in written our minor amendments to the suggestions or to the suggested elements for a recommendation. We are happy to invite Global Environmental Facility to continue to assist eligible parties in undertaking activities in the priority areas. However, we wish to request both Secretariat and GEF to ensure depoliticization of recognizing eligible parties and maintaining its independence from the illegal unilateral sanctions imposed on Iran that has already affected Iran's programs in implementing the CBD and conservation of biological diversity. Iran has reported all of the 4 national reports on the implementation of the CPB and will continue its support towards the implementation of Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and CDD. Thank you very much for your assistance and for your all efforts and your leadership, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iran. I see no more requests from parties to the Cartagena Protocol for the floor. So I will now open the floor for intervention by other parties. I see no request. I will move to intervention from non-parties. I see no request for the floor. Then I would like to move on to interventions by representatives of the major stakeholder groups. I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of the major groups of stakeholders. Each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. And I would like to start on behalf of the IPLC's IIFB. I think it's Jennifer Corpus from Teba Foundation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity commends the Secretariat for comprehensively capturing information from the fourth national reports for the fourth assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan. We note, however, that there is still a gap in involving Indigenous peoples in the Compliance Committee and in the implementation of the protocol at the national level. We are concerned about the limited progress in the implementation of the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol. In this regard, the IIFB urges parties on innovations.
Sorry, IIFB, I think the connection is not good. Can you try again? IIFB? I think we lost IIFB. Maybe we can come back.
Yes.
Oh yeah, now you're back. Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
back. My apologies. We note with concern that only about 1/3 of parties have taken into account socioeconomic considerations in their decision-making on LMOs. And therefore, we urge the parties to make use of the guidance on the assessment of socioeconomic considerations in the context of Article 26 of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety that was developed by the ATEG. Madam Chair, the IPBES recognizes that Indigenous peoples and local communities possess detailed knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystems and have incorporated Indigenous and local knowledge in all of its assessments. Thus, it is also important to incorporate Indigenous science in the risk assessment and risk management of LMOs, and especially LMOs with engineered gene drives, which has the potential for grave adverse effects on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, taking into account Indigenous lifeways. We propose the following changes in the suggested elements for a recommendation. First, it is important to recognize the participation of IPLCs in paragraphs 8 and 27 on coordination for mainstreaming and on cooperation in the implementation of the protocol. Indigenous and local knowledge should be taken into account in paragraph 16 on support for risk assessment and risk management. On socioeconomic considerations, we propose replacing the end of paragraph 25, which reads, in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 1 of the protocol, with arising from the impact of LMOs on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, especially with regard to the values of biological diversity to indigenous peoples and local communities. Finally, we propose a new paragraph 25 bis that would read, encourages parties to make use of the guidance on the assessment of socioeconomic considerations. These proposals will be submitted, well, have been submitted in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IFB. And I would like to continue on behalf of the women's organizations. I think I have Anna Di Pancrazio from FARN. If you can please raise your hand. From a women's organization? Yes, I can see you raise your hand. You had the floor. Fine, you had the floor. Please go ahead.
Should we open up for observers and then come back to FARN?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Let's do that. Okay, I would then like to open up for observers. If you can please raise your hand if you would like to speak. Okay, I see the Third World Network. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety was adopted more than 20 years ago. It was a momentous occasion, but the track record shows that there is still much more to be done, as evident by document 3/3. The threats of LMOs to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, taking into account risks to human health, have not decreased. In fact, with new genetic engineering technologies, including genome editing, synthetic biology, and engineered gene drives, the threats are increasing. There is urgent need for robust international governance and oversight for these new technologies, which need to be translated to national implementation that is unreservedly based on the precautionary principle. The Cartagena Protocol clearly covers these new technologies, but work has to be done to make the protocol fit for the challenge of governing them stringently and to coordinate with this parent treaty, the CBD, which maintains overall oversight. Parties need to urgently implement their obligations under the Cartagena Protocol, as well as under the Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress. To do so, developing country parties especially need financial resources, capacity building, training, and technical capabilities and infrastructure. It is critical that core obligations, including on risk assessment and risk management, detection and identification, especially in cases of unintentional transboundary movement, liability and redress, and public awareness, education, and participation are implemented without delay. The right of parties to take socioeconomic considerations into account is also key, especially in the context of the broad social, cultural, and ethical implications of LMOs and new genetic technologies. The right of citizens, particularly indigenous peoples and local communities, smallholder farmers, women, and youth, to participate in decision-making has to be translated into full, meaningful, and effective mechanisms for participation, both at national and international levels. LMO exporting parties have obligations that they have to comply with under the protocol. The biotechnology industry and LMO exporting countries have to step up to accepting responsibility and liability for when there is harm or damage caused by LMOs. They have to respect countries' and people's right to say no in accordance with the rights afforded under the protocol. It is clear that biosafety is essential to meeting the objectives of the CBD and to protecting biodiversity from the adverse impacts of LMOs and new genetic technologies. There has to be a coordinated approach between the Cartagena Protocol and the CBD, including on new genetic technologies. The principles of precaution and prior informed consent are core threads that link the two treaties. Implementation of the protocol must also be firmly anchored in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This means that there must be clear links made between the GBF and the post-2020 implementation plan and capacity building action plan of the Cartagena Protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Third World Network. I see no more requests for the floor. Yes, and you, Fran Wimans, you would like to come back. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm reading this on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety does not address gender issues specifically. It is important that the protocol recognizes that the impact of introducing LMOs could be gender differentiated because men and women have different knowledges, needs, and vulnerabilities. Women worldwide, and especially women from indigenous groups and local communities, need to have access to information, skills, equipment, regulatory frameworks, and procedures. This will allow them to understand the issues, make informed decisions, manage or avoid any potential risk associated to LMOs, have the capacity to implement the protocol, and have an arena where their needs and concerns are heard and valued, and the need to systematically consider and address their needs and identify and deliver gender-responsive technology driven by gender-specific technology demands. The monitoring elements should consider the mainstreaming of gender in the Cartagena Protocol and the National Biosafety Action Plans. We request that the socioeconomic considerations take into account the impacts on women, including in identifying gender-responsive indicators to complement it, including impacts of cultures and traditional knowledge of rights holders, IPLCs, women, peasants, fisherfolks. During the Informal Substat 24 session, we had delivered our statement under Item 5 on risk assessment and living modified organisms, and we have shared some of our concerns which we request parties to also take into consideration, including in further deliberation. We also support the recommendations presented by IAFB and of other MGS. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fawn, on behalf of women. I see no more requests of the floor. Thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. As previously explained, there will be no conference room papers stemming from this informal session. Together with the Secretariat, I will prepare a short procedure report on the informal session, noting the parties and observers that had made interventions. We have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on Item 4, Assessment and Review of Effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. I now invite delegates to turn to Item 5 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Item 5 addresses a number of different issues and is also related to other items on the SBI agenda. The specific issues to be addressed under Item 5 are the Implementation Plan and Capacity Building Action Plan for the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, the Gender Plan of Action for the post-2020 period, proposals for the date, venue, and periodicity of upcoming meetings, and the Communications Plan for the post-2020 period. In addition, there are a number of overarching cross-cutting issues. To help us organize our deliberations, and as I explained yesterday, we will address some aspects of Item 5 now and return to the item in the coming days to address other parts. More specifically, We will start now with an introduction of a document on the post-2020 implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol, and then have a first round of intervention on this issue. We will then hear from the co-chairs of a working group about the annex to document CBD/SBI/3/4. This introduction will help delegations consider the questions contained in the annex during their statements under the agenda items 6, 7, 9 and 11. We will then adjourn our consideration of agenda item 5. After agenda item 6, 7, 9 and 11 have been completed, agenda item 5 will be reopened. We will hear an introduction of the other documents of this item and take a first round of comments on issues not yet covered. I will also invite the co-leads of the BURN 2, the consultation workshop on the biodiversity-related conventions on the post-2020 global biodiversity, to provide a short briefing of outcomes of that workshop. On this basis, I would like to request the Secretariat to introduce the documents on the post-2020 implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In its decision CP97, the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol decided to develop, as a follow-up to the protocol strategic plan, a specific implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol that is anchored in and complementary to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and it outlined a process for its development. In its decision CP9/3, the meeting of the parties to the protocol acknowledged the need for a specific action plan for capacity building for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and for its supplementary protocol that is aligned with the implementation plan and complementary to the long-term strategic framework for capacity development beyond 2020, and it agreed on an indicative schedule of activities for its development. Pursuant to decisions CP93 and CP97, the draft implementation plan and capacity building action plan have been developed through an extensive consultative process involving, among others, the submission of views, open-ended online discussions, review by the liaison group on the Cartagena Protocol, as well as a review process by parties and observers. This process was carried out over the course of 2019 and 2020. As requested by the meeting of the parties, the Executive Secretary is submitting the implementation plan and capacity building action plan for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation at its third meeting. Document CBD/SBI/3/18 provides in Section 2 an overview of the process of developing the draft implementation plan and capacity building action plan. Section 3 of the document describes linkages with the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and related processes. Section 4 provides suggestions for a recommendation. The draft implementation plan and capacity building action plan is contained in the annex to the document, including a joint narrative introduction and a table. The plans have been presented together to facilitate their alignment and complementarity and to avoid duplication. Madam Chair, the implementation plan and capacity building action plan are closely linked to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and its components, including the long-term strategic framework for capacity development, and it would be important to keep these linkages in mind under the relevant agenda items. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, in keeping with our agreed organizational work, I would now like to hold a first round of interventions on the implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol and the capacity building action plan. As this item is under the Cartagena Protocol, I will give priority in the list of speakers to parties to the Cartagena Protocol, followed by other parties, non-party, and then observers. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list, and when I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. I will start with the interventions by the regions, and I think the first on my list of regions is that Belarus would like to speak for the Central and Eastern European region. Belarus, if you can raise your hand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me put forward a statement on behalf of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. We would like to express our deep appreciation to the Secretariat of the Convention for organizing, ensuring and supporting an extensive consultative process that included submissions, open-ended online discussions, review by the liaison group on the Cartagena Protocol as required by decision CP 9/3. CE region would welcome that the subsidiary body on implementation may also wish to recommend that the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol, at its 10th meeting adopt a decision along the following lines. The Conference of the Parties to the Cartagena Protocol first recognize the usefulness of the 2011-2020 strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety to support its national implementation. Second, stresses the importance of developing a specific post-2020 implementation plan for the protocol that is anchored in and complementary to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in accordance with the decision CP 9/7. Third, recognizes the importance and necessity of developing a specific action plan for capacity building for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and its additional protocol, aligned with the implementation plan and complementary to the long-term strategy for capacity building. Fourth, recognizes that implementation plan and action plan for capacity building can contribute to the achievement of the biosafety target in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, especially for parties to the Convention that are also parties to the Cartagena Protocol. Fifth, recognizes that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework should contribute to the implementation of and compliance with the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and acknowledges the relevance of the protocol and its implementation plan and capacity building action plan to the achievement of the three objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. 6. Welcomes to the contribution of the liaison group for the Cartagena Protocol and the compliance committee to the fourth assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol for the period 2011-2020 and requests them to continue providing input to the fifth assessment and review and evaluation process of the follow-up to the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Belarus. Next on my list of region is Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Portugal, you have the floor. Portugal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The EU and its member states wish to thank the Secretary for the preparation of the draft recommendation of the implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and the draft capacity building action plan for the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and its supplementary protocol. Likewise, we wish to thank the Liaison Group for its valuable contributions. Chair, the alarming high number of parties that still need to fully put in place a functioning biosafety framework and the low number of parties that have joined the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on reliability at redress raise concerns and calls for action. Thus, even 20 years after it came into force, the full implementation of the provisions of the Cartagena Protocol in all parties must still be the driver of our activities. In this regard, we consider the draft plans a very good starting point for discussions. In our view, the goals and objectives of the implementation plan well address an effective and efficient implementation of both the protocol and its supplementary protocol. And the key areas for capacity building are well focused to support this. Both plans are based on experience made during the last decade and ensure sufficient flexibility to account for developments to come and facilitate the monitoring process with simple and easily measurable indicators. Share. In the draft recommendation document, the implementation plan and capacity building action plan are both presented in one table. However, the EU and its member states remain strong in favor of separating the two plans and directing them to individual decisions under their respective agenda items at COP-MOP 10. The EU and its member states are convinced that capacity building is one of the pillars of a successful implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. This outstanding importance of capacity building can best be adequately addressed with standalone documents that can be individually read and referenced. Thus, we maintain that capacity building activities should support the successful implementation of the Cartagena Protocol, and we have added text also to strengthen this alignment. We suggest including indicators to measure the success of the capacity building activities and their contribution to the outcomes, as well as a non-exhaustive indicative list of possible actors and target groups for each activity. We have suggestions for amendments to the draft recommendations, among others, in line with our proposal for two separate plans. We will submit these in writing to the Secretariat. Let me assure that the EU and its member states stand ready and committed to working hard with you and all our colleagues towards a full implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and its supplementary protocol. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Are there any requests for the floor from regions that have not done that yet? No, I see no further requests from the regions. Yes, South Africa, speaking on behalf of the African region. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Chair. South Africa is delivering this statement on behalf of the African group with an understanding that this is an informal meeting convened to keep the momentum. Africa wishes to commend the liaison group and the Secretariat for their work towards the development of a follow-up implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, which is anchored and complementary to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The goals, objectives, and outcomes of the follow-up implementation plan for the biosafety protocol are important to contribute to and realize the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, and therefore Africa notes with concerns that the biosafety elements are not fully integrated in the goals and the 2030 milestone of the GBF. Africa knows that the current draft of the implementation plan and capacity building action plan 2021-2030 has been merged as one document. However, we would like to recall decision 9/3, paragraph 11C, in which the COP-MOP requested the Secretariat to submit Roman figure 1, a draft action plan for capacity building for implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and its supplementary protocol, and Roman figure 2, a draft long-term strategic framework for capacity building beyond 2020 for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation at its third meeting. Chair, in line with Article 22 of the protocol, capacity building is very crucial, especially to developing countries, as it enhances our efforts towards the implementation of the protocol. If we would like to see a results-oriented implementation plan by 2030, a separate, dedicated, and resourced capacity building plan with activities that are also complementary to the implementation plan needs to be developed. Our request would therefore be to separate the two in this regard. Africa agrees with the recommendation that urges parties and invites other governments to review and align as appropriate their national action plans and program relevant to the implementation of the protocol, including their national biodiversity strategies and action plans with the implementation plan and capacity action plan. Africa wishes to highlight the importance of allocating adequate resources for executing the implementation plan, as well as the capacity building action plan, and the important contribution of the Global Environment Facility as the financial mechanism for the protocol. Africa agrees that the baseline for the implementation plan and capacity building action plan should comprise information gathered in the fourth reporting cycle. Africa wishes to reiterate the need for a dedicated biosafety window under the GEF to support implementation on the biosafety protocol and its supplementary protocol in this regard. Africa agrees with the recommendation requesting the Executive Secretary to include in the report format for the fifth national report on the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol and biosafety questions designed to elicit information on the indicators of the implementation plan and capacity building action plan. Africa agrees with the recommendation to conduct a midterm evaluation of the implementation plan and capacity building action plan in conjunction with the fifth assessment and review. In conclusion, Africa knows the liaison group recognition that parties to the Cartagena Protocol could facilitate this through their proactive involvement in the post-2020 processes under the Convention. However, we have noted with concern that the involvement of the Biosafety Protocol national focal points has been limited and would like to stress the need to ensure their active participation in line with paragraph 11A of Decision 14/34. Africa is concerned about the low visibility of the Cartagena Protocol during this intersessional period and would like to remind parties of Decision CP/9 of COPMOP 9. Herein, parties stress the importance of including biosafety in the post-2020 GBF, as well as the necessity of developing a specific implementation plan for the protocol as a follow-up to the 2011-2020 strategic plan for the protocol. Africa therefore requests the same level of attention for the implementation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Speaking on behalf of African region. I will now open the floor for interventions by parties to the Cartagena Protocol. I would like to remind parties, if you have covered this agenda item already in your statement under agenda item 4, there is no need to repeat. The Secretariat has taken note of that. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. I open the floor for parties to the Cartagena Protocol. I see Brazil. Brazil, you have the floor.
Hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, once again. I'll make some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil on the draft implementation plan and the capacity building action plan, and our official position will be presented at the formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil understands that the implementation plan and the capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol still require further improvement. We should strive to simplify the proposed set of indicators, and we should prioritize those indicators that clearly relate to the protocol's obligations. In this regard, we would suggest identifying the relevant articles of the protocol for each goal of the implementation plan. In addition, Brazil believes that the voluntary nature of obligations set within Article 23 on public consultations and Article 26 on socio-economic considerations should be explicitly mentioned in the corresponding goals, objectives, and indicators of the implementation plan. Regarding goals and objectives about risk management, the respective indicators should also include an indicator on cooperation among parties, in order to strengthen the implementation of Article 16, paragraph 5 of the Protocol. We'd also like to express our concern on the references to national checklists in the capacity building activities. Previous decisions under the Protocol have not addressed or endorsed any obligation on checklists. Therefore, the capacity building activities under the implementation plan should not prejudge the manner in which parties will implement and improve their notification systems. Capacity building activities must be developed on a demand-driven basis and take into account different national circumstances and capabilities. Moreover, Brazil believes that capacity building initiatives related to scientific cooperation should include a specific reference to technology transfer to developing countries. And finally, research and academic activities should comprise research on biotechnology as well, given the essential role of biotechnology to improve biosafety policies. We appreciate this opportunity and we look forward to discussing this on the formal face-to-face session. Many thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to China. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China thanks the Secretariat and the liaison group for their work on the protocol implementation plan and capacity building action plan. China believes that the plan should be more consistent with the post-2020 framework and its long-term capacity development strategic framework, so as to strongly support and supplement the two frameworks. Regarding the specific content of the plan, we generally agree with the structure of the existing implementation plan. The current long-term goals comprehensively cover the provisions of the protocol, and quantifiable indicators have been set up to monitor and evaluate the progress of implementation. The capacity building action plan also sets out specific actions to enhance parties' implementation capacities. We have also noticed that there are still some issues that need to be further clarified. First, concerning the term capacity building in the document, we recommend that the terminology be consistent with the post-2020 framework and its long-term capacity development strategic framework. The term capacity development should be utilized. Second, as to the indicators in implementation area are mostly global indicators, and there are no national or regional indicators. B, supportive environment. The targets of resource mobilization are still mainly domestic actions. We suggest to strengthen support by developed countries to developing countries, and related international cooperation should be established. Third, the specific capacity building activities in the action plan are mostly short-term and fragmented. There is no systematic and long-term capacity development capacity plan. It is recommended to draw on the experience and lessons reflected in the implementation report of the Capacity Development Short-Term Action Plan 2017 to 2020 as a reference to revise the draft long-term strategic framework. And some parts, there are some overlaps. So our written inputs will be submitted later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I would now like to give the floor to New Zealand, and after that I will take a 15 minutes break. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. New Zealand acknowledges and commends the efforts undertaken over many months and meetings leading to the development of this draft implementation plan for its consideration by the SBSTA. New Zealand notes that this plan, once adopted, will cover the years 2021 to 2030 and believes it should be as robust as possible to ensure the effective implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. Therefore, New Zealand suggests additional objectives, indicators, key areas for capacity building, and capacity building activities. In our view, these suggestions will add clarity and focus regarding human capability building and training and risk assessment, risk management, and detection of LMOs, which we hope will lead to more effective implementation of the Cartagena Protocol over the next 10 years. We also suggest the encouragement of cooperation amongst parties where mutually agreed to assist those with inadequate resources in their reporting and compliance obligations under the protocol. As these suggestions are too lengthy for a 3-minute intervention, we will submit them to the Secretariat in writing in the interest of transparency.
Excuse me, New Zealand, if you could speak a bit slower. Thank you.
I'm finished.
Okay, thank you very much, New Zealand. Colleagues, we'll now take a 15-minute break. Please retain your connection during the break. There's no need to log off. And we will continue with our interventions after break. Secretariat, when will we reconvene?
I think we will reconvene around 8:45. So in 8:45 Montreal time, so 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will reconvene.
Yeah.
We will reconvene at 8:45 Montreal time. Please retain your connection during the break and have a nice break. Distinguished delegates, I hope you have enjoyed your break. Let us now resume our meeting. And I would like to continue with my list of parties to the Cartagena Protocol. Are there any more parties to the Cartagena Protocol who would like to speak on this agenda item? I see no more requests on the parties to the Cartagena Protocol, so I will move on to interventions from other parties. No? No more requests? Any requests on the floor from non-parties? No, I see no more requests from parties or non-parties. So then I would like to continue with the interventions from major groups. So I would start with the on behalf of IPLCs from the IIFB. I don't see that they raised their hand yet. Maybe I can start with the youth. Yes, youth. If you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Biosafety is an intergenerational issue with negative and possibly irreversible impact that could be felt far into the future. All actors, all sectors, all ministries must act with intergenerational equity in mind, strictly applying the precautionary principle in cases where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage to biodiversity. We also call on parties to ratify the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress. We thank everyone involved for their efforts in putting together the draft implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol. We found that the plan contains many good and important elements. In particular, we highlight that it provides guidance to implement actions and comply with the obligations under the protocol, while not neglecting to have planned for the enabling environment to fulfill these obligations. We have hopes that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework can reach the same level of attention and commitment to its enabling condition. We also want to highlight the inclusion of crucial elements on socio-economic impacts of living modified organisms, on mainstreaming biodiversity in biosafety in education, on public consultation, on access to information for the public, and on mechanism to enable participation in decision-making. We point out that potential cultural and health impacts must not be ignored, and that the consultation must allow for the full and effective participation of rights holders. We also remind parties that we as youth are ready to be key strategic partners in implementing these elements in a respectful and inclusive way. Furthermore, there is a need to mobilize resources to support developing countries and to guarantee the participation of women, youth, indigenous people, and local communities from early stages in order to turn this plan into reality. As a final point, we remind you again that we do not take the measures needed that when we do not take the measures needed to ensure biosafety of the highest standards, youth, women, indigenous people, and local communities will be hardest hit by the impacts. Thus, in the implementation of these plans, as with all other aspects of the convention, we call for parties to carefully consider what truly meaningful participation means when engaging with right holders on these important matters. This does not just mean us being in the room. It means that the information needed to make informed decisions must flow down to communities in forms and languages that we can understand. It means institutionalizing mechanisms that allow for continual participations rather than a one-off event. It means being gender responsive and disaggregating data by age, sex, and indigenous status. And for indigenous peoples, it means respecting their rights for free, prior informed consent and the right to self-determination. Taking these steps will pave a way towards just and equitable implementation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth. On my list for major stakeholders is also, if I have IPLC's IFB from TEBA Foundation. If you can raise your hand. Yeah. Okay, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Madam Chair, this is just to say that we have covered the Cartagena Protocol in our statement on agenda item 4, and we will be addressing the annex of document SBI-3 4 when you reopen the agenda item on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that concludes my list of major stakeholder groups. For this, I will continue with the interventions from observers. If you please raise your hand, if observers would like to speak. Third World Network, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor again. As discussions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework advance, it is critical that biosafety finds its place and is adequately reflected in the GBF. Evidence from the past decades of LMO release and use has shown time and again that there are adverse effects on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, including from the use of co-technologies such as herbicides. These threats are increasing with the advent of new genetic engineering technologies, for which the precautionary principle has to be implemented nationally. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety remains the sole international legally binding agreement that specifically addresses LMOs. We welcome the implementation plan and capacity building action plan of the protocol 2021 to 2030, which are the outcomes of an extensive and in-depth consultative process. We call on parties to adopt and implement the plans with urgency. Implementation of the Cartagena Protocol must be firmly anchored in the post-2020 GBF. There has to be clear links made between the GBF, including its monitoring framework, and the implementation plan and capacity building action plan of the protocol. We feel that Target 16 of the updated Zero Draft of the post-2020 GBF can be strengthened by incorporating and operationalizing the following principles, which are reflected already in the protocol itself and in the implementation plan. First, the precautionary principle that underpins both the CBD and the protocol to avoid or minimize adverse effects on biodiversity, taking also into account risks to human health. Second, the principle of prior informed consent in relation to parties giving that advance informed agreement according to procedures under the protocol, and that of the free, prior, and informed consent of potentially affected indigenous peoples and local communities. Third, the need to consider, and the right of parties to consider, the socioeconomic, cultural, and ethical impacts of biotechnology, including of LMOs and the new genetic engineering technologies. Fourth, the right of citizens, particularly of IPLCs, smallholder farmers, women, and youth, to fully, meaningfully, and effectively participate in decision-making on LMOs and new genetic technologies. And finally, the urgent need for liability and redress arrangements, including accelerated ratification of the Nagoya-Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress, because this is important in the case of damage or imminent threat of damage to biodiversity, taking also into account risks to human health. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Third World Network. And I see no more requests for the floor, so I will continue with the introduction of the annex by the co-chairs. Distinguished delegates, I would now like to invite the co-chairs for open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, Mr. Francis Ogwal from Uganda and Mr. Basil van Hav of Canada, to provide an introduction to the annex contained in CPD/3/4. This introduction will help delegations consider the questions contained in the annex during their statements under the agenda items 6, 7, 9, and 11. Co-chairs, you have the floor.
You hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to join you. I will present the first few slides, and then Francis will take you to the last part of the presentation. I believe the Secretariat will be displaying the slides momentarily. But in the interest of time, maybe I can just start, and the slides will catch up with me. When we started the preparation for this, we realized with Charlotta and Jyoti that there was a number of agenda items that crossed between the GBF and the agenda of this SBI meeting. Yet, we also equally realize that all those agenda items, and I'm now on slide number 2, all those agenda items have their own links outside of the GBF. So in order to be efficient, we felt that a single discussion on each issue should cover both requirements. However, in order to ensure that the SBI understand the specific needs of the GBF and the specific needs the open-ended working group has, we developed a checklist in our discussion. And basically, we turned that checklist into a list of questions. Our request to you is to consider those questions during the discussion. There may be other questions you choose to consider, and there may be some questions that you consider are not relevant. The outcome is basically we want that to be a cross-reference of the outcome of the various agenda item with our question. Now moving to the following slide, we looked at the various agenda item of SBI and how they link with the zero draft and whether there was a need for question. And we have heard that in the previous agenda item, people were referring to target. For example, on the one just before us, biosafety is directly linked to target 16, and we had ample input as it is, so there was no need in our mind for further questions. Same thing for gender, which is covered in section G, small c. You will see in the next slide a number of questions related to resource mobilization on goal D, target 17, 18 in section F and A. Then moving a little bit too fast, and I want to go through slide number 3 in detail. The capacity building also has a number of questions related to section, and it is treated in section F, target 19, on knowledge and communication, section I.
Basil, I think you disappeared. Is Basil still with us?
into 4 sections. Section 1 is on needs, and around the need, what we need to understand is the cost of the implementation of the biodiversity frameworks and the cost of inaction. The second section on savings is about what can be achieved through effective and coherent action in terms of diminishing the cost of the action we need to take on biodiversity. This links very much to the first question on the following watch, which is on the source of funding. And I don't know if people can see slide number 4. Here we go. So, so the resource that can be regenerated through repurposing of existing subsidies and finance is very much linked to 1.2. Other source of fund, what is the role of philanthropy? What is the role of business spending? What is the role of national budget and national financial plan? And we were specifically looking at the practice in the climate change where there is unconditional commitment versus conditional ones. Official development assistance will continue to be an important subject. What is the role of the Global Environment Facility? How could the GF expedite access to funds, that notion of timing, and how parties will respond to the commitment taken under Article 20? The role of other funds, a number of parties have expressed the desire to see a portion of their climate funding directed to a nature-based solution. And how is there an overlap or is there a need of cooperation and setting up funding windows so that this can be maximized? And then finally, biodiversity finance plan. What is the level of detail? Should those plans address individual targets? Should they be mandatory? And, and should they be merged within the other national plan? And then what is the role of finance plan for other processes, including finance plan and addressing biodiversity issues? So we're now moving to slide 5, and I'll pass the floor to my colleague, Francis. Francis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'll take the other slides, which are about 3 or 4 in nature. So the next one is on capacity building, and I think this is one area that, in addition to resource mobilization, we have had quite a lot of interest in, and we know that it was one of those that perhaps could have hindered effective implementation of the current strategic plan. And there were discussions on capacity building that kept going on, whereas the plan or the strategic plan needed to be implemented. So this time around, these are the things that we would like to see them done in tandem with the post-2020 process. So in terms of question, of course, that also includes resource mobilization and others. Now, in terms of question here, we are looking at the global capacity building strategy. And the question here is, would that be the best way to achieve the result for capacity building and development? Or do we think it could be done in other ways? But that is the question we should be focusing on. Then how are the national conditions and needs determined? We know that countries will differ a lot in terms of their capacities. So those needs as determined and communicated, how shall they be determined and communicated? Should this be done through the national plans? Here, maybe you're talking about the national biodiversity plans or the national development plans and others, but these are the questions coming up. What processes are needed for traditional knowledge? We know that traditional knowledge plays a very big role in a number of things that we do in CBD, including, of course, issue on capacity building. What processes are needed to further support the development of biodiverse information and knowledge? If we are going to manage information, we are going to manage the knowledge that we need to conserve biodiversity. How are we going to do that? How should it be encouraged and supported? That is when you look at the part of technology and scientific cooperation, how are we going to really make sure that we encourage it and that it is supported? And we know there are some cooperations that take place. You're talking of south to south, maybe also others north to south. So what are this cooperation between these parties going to be like?
cooperation between these parties and other parties supported by developed parties or from other partners, how do we want it to be tackled when we are looking at this process? The opportunities that are there, how do we want to take them forward? Let's go to the next slide. This is on transparency and accountability. In general terms, if we are going to be more successful with the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, we have to learn and take lessons from what happened with the current strategic plan. Maybe the issue of transparency and responsibilities were not well handled there. So now we are asking, how is transparency and responsibility of all stakeholders going to be ensured? And what about from the other UN conventions? How are they going to report? And we're talking of bringing on almost all stakeholders in the post-2020. So when you look at the business sector, how are they going to report? How do subnational governments report? You know that the action on this post-2020 at national level is going to take place at subnational level. The national level will be there more or less on coordination aspect, but action will be happening at some subnational level. Is this through their national governments? Will the subnational government report to the national government? At the end, we have the basis for national plans, as already I think alluded to earlier. What is the instrument to communicate national commitments and action? Maybe it is the NBSAP. What is the role of the NBSAP in this? If the NBSAP is going to be the tool for that, how often and when are national plans updated? And this is a question we should be asking ourselves, because as soon as the post-2020 is adopted, you will probably hear requests for countries to update and align their NBSAPs. So how often are we going to do that? Are changes to the NBSAP needed at all? We can debate on that. If NBSAPs are to be updated, how do we ensure that financial support is available in a timely manner? You heard yesterday from, I think it was African region, that said we had a challenge, they had a challenge where the funds probably came late, and then the review process and updating took 5 years. So by the time you are ending the review and updating, you are thinking of reporting, on implementation. 5 years for 10 years wasted. So how are we going to do things differently this time around? Must NBSAPs include all relevant targets from the post-2020 global biodiversity framework? If so, for this, and who decides what is relevant? These are things that will happen at national level. Must NBSAPs reflect all headline indicators? These are the indicators that we will be expected to report on. So must they reflect all that? Can countries use their own national indicators or only indicators agreed by conference of parties? Do parties have the necessary capacity and resources to report on mandatory indicators? This is critical, because these indicators could even be agreed upon, the headline indicators and so forth, but is the capacity there? How can we ensure that NBSAPs are developed expeditiously? This is where I was referring to it earlier, even that if we take a lot of time here, then we risk losing already a lot of time in implementation. So we have to do things a little bit differently this time. So we have to minimize delays. How can benefits, that is from synergies, from the coordination and integration with other plans, better be realized? And I think let's go to the second last slide. This is the one that concerns still transparency and accountability, looking at things now at the national level. When you look at the processes, modality for reporting, for example, some rapid, concise report, are we going to look at that as being what we need to do more frequently? Or do we just have to have a comprehensive report? And we know that perhaps the reporting period here is for the CBD is usually every 4 years, but this time around we maybe think a little bit differently. The current reporting period, should we maintain that, or should we shorten it? If we shorten it, is it going to assist us report better? If we prolong it, if we make it the same, what have we learned that we need to be bringing forward in terms of reporting? How should countries report on their commitments and actions listed in their national plans? Should reports cover all actions and commitments, or a subset? And if so, why? Why should it be a subset? How are we going to decide on that? And will it be giving us the information we need to see progress towards the 2050 vision? Should different types of information be reported different times or frequencies? We are talking of maybe having interim reports in addition to the full reports. Do we have some inter reports, then a full report, or just one? We do full reports at any one given time. How do we ensure that reports are provided according to agreed schedule? Again, this is it. When you look at right now, there's a lot of disparity in terms of reporting on deadlines agreed at COP. But why is that happening? We have to understand that. Maybe for countries that need financial support, this might be coming late. As I speak now, I think there is still effort going on now to support some countries to prepare the fourth national report, the Cartagena Protocol, but the deadline long passed. So how are we doing things this time differently? How do we ensure financial support? In other words, that is what I was touching on. I think that is usually what causes a lot of delays. Even if it is there, how can it be easily accessed? How could the reports for different processes be harmonized, synchronized, or even integrated, including the convention and, of course, the Nagoya Protocol? You see, we are going to be reporting, is it on one template, or are we going to use different ones, or we're going to maintain the current one where you report on CBD, report on Nagoya, report on Cartagena Protocol, and you can see the burden straight away on parties. So we are talking of post 2020 global biodiversity framework that is going to include all these three now. Why should the reporting then still be separate? The role of IPBES and the GBOs in these processes, in the reporting, what is the value of the global biodiversity outlook? We need to be looking at that. And then some gaps and overlaps. How do we ensure that the review system ensures learning, transparency, and adaptation? You know, when we are doing that, people should be able to learn something from it. Should national reports be reviewed for their conformity to guidelines agreed by the Congress of the parties? And if so, what are the modalities for this, and who should undertake the review? So, of course, there will be guidelines given. Do we need to be reflecting on that a little bit? And lastly, what kind of data should be used, and what is the role of data collected by non-state actors? And by the way, these are very many out there. They have very good information. How do we make use of that? What are the modalities for data collection for the global stock check? So I think those were some of the questions we wanted to share with you. And the last slide, I think, is just one that concludes our presentation, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you very much.
Thank you, co-chairs Basil and Francis, for this informative presentation. I am confident that the questions in the annex will help advance our discussions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and also ensure that SBI provides the best inputs possible. Distinguished delegates, this concludes our consideration of this agenda item for today. As said before, we will resume our consideration of this item later this week. I now invite delegates to consider agenda item 6 on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism. As there are two parts to this agenda item, I will request the Secretariat to introduce the documents of both resource mobilization and the financial mechanism at the same time. Secretariat, you have the floor. I understand both Marcus Lehmann and Sibin Jiang will introduce the items today. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good time of the day to everybody. On resource mobilization, you will recall that in decision 1422, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to contract a panel of experts to undertake preparatory work on resource mobilization in form of reports on several aspects related to the development of the resource mobilization component in order to help inform the work of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and the conference of the parties. You will also recall that the panel already presented its work during the special session of the subsidiary body on 17 September 2020. Accordingly, on resource mobilization, you have before you a total of 4 pre-session documents and 2 complementing information documents, namely document SBI/3/5 is the chapeau document summarizing the work undertaken and providing the draft recommendation. And then 3 agenda documents provide the work of the expert panel, responding to the tasks given to them in paragraph 15 of the decision. Namely, addendum document 1 provides a synthesis of the evaluation and review of the existing strategy for resource mobilization and Aichi Biodiversity Target 20. The full evaluation and review is made available as an information document, and that's information document number 2. Then the addendum 2 document provides the preliminary report on estimating the resources needed for implementing the post-2020 framework. Supplementary technical information is provided in an accompanying information document. This is information document number 5. The report provided in the addendum 2 document is characterized as being preliminary because some relevant analyses were still underway by the time of its finalization, such as, for instance, the needs assessment for the 8th replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund, which is requested by decision 14/23. The final report will be provided to the conference of the parties at its 15th meeting. Finally, the addendum 3 document, so that is CBD/CBI SBI/3/5/@3, provides the contribution of the panel of experts to the draft resource mobilization component. Thank you very much.
I think, Yibin, you could present the financial mechanism.
Yes, Yibin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the financial mechanism, the Executive Secretary has prepared document CBD/SBI/3/6. The document responds to decision 14/23 and is focused on 3 issues. Draft terms of reference for the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. Assessment of funding needs in anticipation of the 8th replenishment of the Trust Fund of the Global Environment Facility. Preparation for a 4-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities for the 8th replenishment period of GEF Trust Fund. It also provides elements for a draft recommendation by the subsidiary body on implementation. There are 3 addendums to this document. CBD/SBI/3/6/1 contains the preliminary report of the GEF to the 15th meeting of the Conference of Parties. Addendum 2 is a summary of the interim report prepared by the panel of experts with generous financial support from the Government of Sweden and the European Commission on the assessment of the amount of funds needed for the implementation of the Convention and its protocols during the 8th replenishment period of GF Trust Fund. Addendum 3 provides a combination of the elements of advice from biodiversity-related conventions, namely the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species, the Convention on Wetlands of International Importance, and the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. To support these addendums, the Secretariat has made available 3 information documents as shown on the projected slide. Furthermore, a planning note for the 8th replenishment of the GF Trust Fund /Rev1 circulated by the GF can be accessed on the documents page on the other documents for the 3rd meetings of the subsidiary body on implementation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat, for this introduction. Distinguished delegates, as part of our consideration of this agenda item, I now invite the Secretariat of the Global Environment Facility to introduce a preliminary report from the GEF to the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Mr. Gustavo Fonseca, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce the GEF report to the SBI. The report to the Conference of the Parties of the CBD submitted to SBI-3 as CBD/SBI/3/6/add1 provides information on the activities of the GEF in the biodiversity focal area in response to COP14 guidance to the GEF that was received in November of 2018. The submitted draft report of the GEF covers the period from July 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2019. But due to the extended delay in holding SBI-3 due to the pandemic, in my introduction of this report today, I'm providing updated programming information that covers the period from July 1st, 2018 to November 3rd, 2020, which also includes projects approved in the December 2020 work program. I would like to highlight 3 key findings within the report on programming efficiency, portfolio performance, and resource mobilization beyond the biodiversity focal area. On programming efficiency, the total amount of the GEF biodiversity focal area resources that was effectively programmed at this date was a little over $1 billion, or 77.5% of the total focal area resources for the GEF 7 cycle. These resources supported 63 biodiversity focal area projects and 72 multifocal area projects. 6 programmatic approaches, including the impact programs, have included 75 of these projects. And a total of 87 countries have benefited from these investments. On portfolio performance, 80% of the biodiversity project cohort under implementation during the reporting period has been rated as moderately satisfactory or above. In addition, 82% of the multifocal area project cohort has been rated as moderately satisfactory or above in achieving implementation progress, and 90% have been rated moderately satisfactory or above in achieving the project's development objectives. On resource mobilization, the total value of the investments from all GEF resources to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets amounted to $2.831 billion, leveraging co-financing of $19.582 billion. Finally, at its 59th meeting in December 2020, the GEF Council requested the GEF trustee, in cooperation with the GEF Secretariat, to initiate discussions for the 8th replenishment of resources for the GEF Trust Fund for its 8th replenishment cycle, or GEF 8. This first meeting is to be held virtually on April 22 and 23 of 2021. With this, Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. von. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry for that. Then let me start by once again, thank you, Mr. Fonseca, for this presentation. And let me now invite delegates to take the floor on agenda item 6 on resource mobilization and the financial mechanism. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list, and when I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. I will start the interventions by the regions. I will now open the floor for statements from the regions. And in my list, I will start with Georgia, speaking on behalf of the CEE region. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, on behalf of the Central and Eastern European region, let me thank the Secretariat and the panel of experts for all the extraordinary work undertaken to prepare the documents. Resource mobilization is crucial to ensure implementation of the post-2020 biodiversity framework. Considering this, the CE region is happy to see the resource mobilization target 18 separately within the framework. And it is clear that financial flow from all sources should be increased to close the funding gap. We also note that the countries will need to assess their expenditures and the funding need for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF at the national level. At the same time, we also share the view that the resource mobilization activities under the post-2020 GBF should follow the architecture suggested by the expert panel, namely, reducing or redirecting resources causing harm to biodiversity, b. generating additional resources from all sources, and enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of resource use. Therefore, we also believe that the resource mobilization component should be considered and implemented in conjunction with other targets, including those concerning the harmful subsidies and mainstreaming, which is a prerequisite to avoid potential negative impact on biodiversity and respective financial expenditures in future. We would like to emphasize importance of national biodiversity finance plans, and we consider that such plans should be developed as part of the MBSEPs and should aim to close the overall funding gap identified during the assessment of financial needs. It should also be mentioned that the countries will need respective guidance, since this is the new concept for many countries. Here we consider the experience and methodology developed under the Biodiversity Finance Initiative exceptionally useful. The financial reporting frameworks are important to ensure that the baseline information for the monitoring indicator is available. However, we believe that further capacity development for the countries on this issue is needed. Particularly, we would suggest development of a guidance on preparation of the reports, also ensuring that the reports are prepared in a consistent manner. Speaking of baseline information, if under the target 18 we are speaking about increasing financial resources by X%, it is not clear whether the 2020 is the baseline year or not. The proposed headline indicator also does not fully reflect the suggested target. At the same time, we note that it is important to aim at closing the gap in funding through all possible mechanisms rather than only increasing funding by X%. Having in mind the post-2020 GBF covers many cross-cutting directions, important aspect to consider is improving cooperation with other MEAs to achieve synergies and efficient use of existing resources. Private sector clearly has a powerful role in addressing biodiversity loss. In this regard, in order to identify biodiversity impacts and incorporate biodiversity into the business models and operations, effective communication with private sector is required. In combination with the legal requirements, we consider that awareness rising on dependency of economic sectors on biodiversity and increased engagement of private sector in our activities is essential, thus ensuring their willingness to address the root causes of biodiversity loss. Involvement of international and national financial institutions and inclusion of biodiversity considerations in the financial policies and guidelines is also essential for mainstreaming and respectively avoiding future expenditures. We wish also to emphasize that the green agenda agreed by the countries of Southeast Europe, envisaged by the European Green Deal, can provide substantial support for the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. Finally, once again, we would like to acknowledge invaluable contribution of the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, assisting countries in their efforts for resource mobilization, including development and implementation of the biodiversity finance plans, and emphasize the importance to continue this work under the post-2020 GBF and its resource mobilization component, and extend to other countries in the CE region. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Georgia. Speaking on behalf of the CE region, I have now on my list for the regions Antigua and Barbuda and European Union. Are there any more regions who would like to speak? So please raise your hand. Kenya, are you speaking on behalf of the African region?
Hear me?
Yeah. Yes, please go ahead if you're speaking for the region.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya appreciates the opportunity to speak and to present this statement on behalf of the African group. Chair, recording decision 14/22 on resource mobilization, COP14 affirmed that resource mobilization will be an integral part of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. In the same decision, the COP requested the Executive Secretary to establish a panel of experts to prepare pertinent analysis and report to the overall process for the post-2020 framework. Africa welcomes the report of the panel of experts. The report analyzes the resources needed to implement the post-2020 framework and has identified huge resource gap, including underestimation of resource range. The need to raise and avail additional resources for all sources is inevitable. Further, the recommendation for the three reports have put a lot of emphasis on governments to redirect funds to finance the implementation of the framework. Africa also welcomes the inclusion of Target 18 in the draft post-2020 framework. We propose that the target be amended as follows: that by 2030, all parties have set aside a given percentage of GDP for biodiversity-related activities. Developed countries parties have set aside a given percentage of GDP as ODA for biodiversity-related activities in line with Article 20 of the Convention. And all parties have policy and legal reforms in place to increase by a given percentage financial resources from all international and domestic sources through new, additional, and effective financial resources commensurate with the ambitions of the goals and targets of the framework and implementation and implement the strategy for capacity building and technology transfer and scientific cooperation to meet the needs for implementing the post-2020 Group Biodiversity Framework. To achieve this target, we request the Executive Secretary build on the strategy for resource mobilization for the Aichi targets to develop targets-based strategy resource mobilization to implement the framework, taking into account roles and responsibilities included in Article 20 of the CBD. The strategy should set targets for international flows, domestic financing, and private sector contribution in line item in their business plans, ensuring net gain outcomes and recommended policy response by parties, indeed to achieve the resource mobilization targets. In particular, the strategy should have targets for the following elements: percentage contribution of GDP towards biodiversity-related activities. 2. Percentage of ODA as a percentage of GDP of all parties that is targeted at the biodiversity in line with Article 20 of the CBD. Policy and legal reforms to obligate business and citizens to participate in this sourcing of biodiversity. Financial mechanisms such as tax regimes, for example, subsidies and incentives, payment for ecosystem services, needed to enhance resource mobilization for biodiversity. And lastly, mainstreaming of biodiversity across sectors to increase capacity and engagement of all in the society. This may include identifying harmful subsidies and potential incentives. Thank you, Chair. I submit.
Thank you, Kenya, speaking on behalf of African region. I now invite Antigua and Barbuda, speaking on behalf of GRULAC. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement is being made on behalf of GRULAC. Dear colleagues, we are currently dealing with a sanitary, economic, and social crisis that is having severe consequences on the implementation of our environmental policies. This unprecedented situation is already affecting our capacities and budgets. It calls for urgent action to address the three objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner, and it needs to be considered under the issue of resource mobilization and financial mechanism. In Latin America and the Caribbean, most of the resources for biodiversity conservation have traditionally been provided by national governments. This contribution, which was a great effort from our countries during normal times, will become more difficult as we face the economic and social challenges of recovering from the pandemic. The COVID-19 multidimensional crisis has further impacted the already burdened developing country efforts, and we know that national recovery packages on their own will not be enough to bend the curve of biodiversity loss. In this sense, GRULAC highlights that now, more than ever, we require a decisive, multilateral response that financially supports a sustainable and inclusive recovery from COVID-19, while at the same time contributes to the achievement of the three objectives of the Convention and the ambitious, balanced, and realistic goals and targets to be adopted at COP15. GRULAC supports a strong global framework to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity, along with a real commitment to enhance the provision and mobilization of financial and non-financial means of implementation, including public and private resources, in order to expand support for implementation of the Convention. We encourage developed countries and other donors to contribute financial assistance, capacity building, and technology transfer in line with the principles enshrined in the Rio de Janeiro Declaration on Environment and Development of 1992 and Article 20 of the Convention. Resource mobilization must be a key element of the framework to meet the incremental costs of national implementation in developing countries. A higher ambition in the Global Biodiversity Framework must be commensurate with a higher ambition on resource mobilization. In this regard, we welcome the results and recommendations of the study on resource mobilization, undertaken by the panel of experts. Similar challenges regarding resources were identified in the GRULAC post-2020 regional consultation held in Uruguay, including the lack of capacity development, financial, human, institutional, technical, and information resources at both the national and global level, all of which are crucial for the effective implementation of the Convention and its protocols. There's also an urgent need to address the elimination of incentives harmful to biodiversity and the promotion of positive incentives for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as other innovative solutions, such as payments for ecosystem services in line with multilateral agreed rules. In this context, we expect that the eighth replenishment of the GEF provides new and additional financial resources in a predictable, adequate, and timely manner to enable developing country parties to meet the full incremental costs of the Global Biodiversity Framework. In particular, it should consider the investments that are required to build resilience and address the economic, social, and environmental challenges of the post-COVID period. Resource mobilization requires also increasing synergies with private investment mechanisms, financial institutions, other multilateral environmental agreements and efforts, such as the SDGs. There's an opportunity for leveraging international platforms that boost cooperation and provide innovative solutions for raising awareness and capacities for increasing the understanding of biodiversity among different sectors, as well as the implementation of sustainable business models. As a result of the adjustments, more resources are expected to be allocated to field programs, while strengthening the capacity of country teams to implement integrated policies and reducing transaction costs. To conclude, we would like to reiterate that for GRULAC, there's no such thing as half ambition. We do not have the luxury to fall short again in any part of the post-2020 framework, particularly in resource mobilization component. Otherwise, we would not be able to halt the current biodiversity crisis and achieve the vision of living in harmony with nature. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Antigua Barbuda, speaking on behalf of GRULAC. And I now give the floor to European Union, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank the Secretariat for the documentation and the panel of experts for its reports. We need transformative change across economic and financial systems to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. Aligning public and private financial flows with biodiversity objectives is crucial in order to scale up resource mobilization. This requires rethinking economic and financial incentives and flows as part of our strategy to address the global funding gap for biodiversity at all levels. We must mobilize all types of resources, financial, human, technical, and institutional, from all sources, domestic, international, private, and public. We also need enabling and regulatory frameworks conducive to resource mobilization from both private and public sector. The EU and its member states would like to underline the principles set out by the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Development Financing, including that for all countries, public policies and the mobilization and effective use of domestic resources, underscored by the principle of national ownership, are central to the common pursuit of sustainable development. These are fundamental conditions to halt biodiversity loss that should be promoted in a balanced way and as part of a broader global agenda. The EU and its member states support the expert panel vision that resource mobilization encompasses the generation of new resources, the reduction of resource needs through the reduction of harmful subsidies and practices, for instance, more efficient and impactful use of resources, and effectively mainstreaming biodiversity in every economic sector. We generally support the structure of the resource mobilization component of the post-2020 framework as proposed by the expert panel in Annex 1 to the SBI document. The EU and its member states have significantly increased their cooperation and financing commitments on biodiversity in partner countries over the last decade, in particular to developing countries. However, science tells us that international public financing only plays a limited role compared to the total financial needs, which can only be met by aligning private and public financial flows with biodiversity objectives. We find it relevant to further discuss a target on international financial flows for biodiversity, considering both international private and public sources. Under such target, all parties in a position to do so would jointly commit to mobilize resources from a wide variety of sources, both private and public. Given the need for international financing to leverage other resources, the link with domestic resource mobilization is critical. We are open to discuss a target on domestic resource mobilization and believe that both domestic and international resource mobilization should be addressed in a mutually supportive way. We believe that the development of national biodiversity finance plans or similar instruments will be key to support the implementation of the post-2020 framework at national level. Such plans would help identify current expenditures and evaluate progress in implementing national biodiversity objectives according to national priorities, in particular based on national plans, strategies, and possible commitments that will be discussed under SBI Item 9. They should help generating national and international, private and public financing, enhancing efficiency and tracking progress. These finance plans can also help increase coherence and synergies with national plans in other sectors, for instance on SDGs or climate. Flexibility will be key in terms of format and methodology, but we could explore the possible need for guidance on a minimal standard, which could build upon the biofin methodology. The EU and its member states further believe that the target on harmful subsidies should focus on redirecting, repurposing or reforming, and eliminating harmful incentives, including subsidies harmful for biodiversity, so that by 2030, incentives, including public economic incentives, are either positive or neutral for biodiversity. We also propose that this target include language around the need to identify and measure harmful incentives. The EU and its member states also generally support the draft elements of a possible successor to the current strategy for resource mobilization for adoption at COP15. We look forward to other parties' comments and proposals. We should use the time available before formal SBI-3 to exchange and make progress towards defining a meaningful resource mobilization component of the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, European Union, on behalf of EU and its member states. I will now open the floor for interventions by parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button. I give the floor to Australia, followed by New Zealand and China. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Australia's National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, Australia's Strategy for Nature 2019 to 2030, represents our commitment to address biodiversity decline and enhance collaboration and partnership across all sectors. Australia acknowledges the challenges in the implementation of the Aichi biodiversity targets and the role of resource mobilization in this. We agree that there is a need to ensure increased and reliable flows of financial resources to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. It is Australia's view that biodiversity conservation is a shared responsibility, and meeting the resource requirements for the full and effective implementation of the GBF cannot be achieved by government alone. Concerted effort will be required from all relevant actors, including financial institutions, civil society, and the private sector, in order for the Convention's vision of living in harmony with nature to be truly achieved. Australia also acknowledges the value that national biodiversity finance plans offer as practical means of supporting domestic biodiversity conservation efforts through the efficient allocation of resources. We would therefore welcome further work being undertaken by the Executive Secretary and the Biofin Initiative of the United Nations Development Programme to support increased uptake in the development and use of these plans among parties. Australia notes that decisions over domestic implementation of the CBD strategic plan remain the sovereign right of parties, including decisions over plans for domestic resourcing. It is therefore appropriate for national biodiversity plans to be made voluntary under the CBD, its strategic plan, and the successor to the Strategy for Resource Mobilisation. Australia remains committed to the Convention on Biological Diversity and its obligations in relation to financial resources as outlined in Article 20 of the Convention, and looks forward to negotiating in good faith to establish appropriate and achievable resource mobilisation components under the post-2020 framework, which are agreeable to all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. I now continue with New Zealand, followed by China and Japan. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. While New Zealand will have more specific comments to make for the formal SBI meeting on the proposed strategy for resource mobilisation, as well as the draft recommendations and decision, we will focus our comments now on some general points. It is clear that the enormous volumes of money that are poured into harmful subsidies and incentives could go a long way to addressing the funding gap for biodiversity. We would like to see the wording of paragraph 15 in the draft decision strengthened to make clear that subsidies and incentives harmful to biodiversity must be eliminated or repurposed. With respect to consideration of other sources of funds, New Zealand has consistently taken the view that financing needs to come from a broad range of sources. In that context, our view is that a reference to philanthropic funding as a source should be included in paragraph 7 of the proposed strategy. The obligations in the Convention relate to parties, but we should take a holistic approach to our strategy. The strategy also makes the assumption that the important contributions of Indigenous peoples and local communities are non-financial ones. Those contributions are indeed important, but to suggest that IPLCs don't also make financial contributions is to fall into the trap of suggesting IPLCs are not diverse. We fully support references to the importance of biodiversity mainstreaming and resource mobilisation to build ecosystem resilience into economic recovery after the pandemic. We are acting on this in New Zealand through a $1.1 billion investment into jobs for nature as part of our COVID recovery. New Zealand also values the central role that the Global Environment Facility has as the financial mechanism to the CBD. We were pleased to increase significantly our contribution at the last replenishment. We look forward to ongoing engagement with the GEF, donors and developing countries on the timely implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. On national biodiversity finance plans, we think that international bodies should be mindful of the different processes, budgetary cycles and dynamics at national government level. The CBD should be careful not to dictate specific forms of national financing plans. A one-size-fits-all approach has never been the CBD way. A national biodiversity finance plan that fits specific national circumstances is much more likely to have buy-in. We think that the guiding principles in paragraph 8 of the draft strategy could be more clearly articulated, and we look forward to further discussions on these at the formal meeting of the SBI. Finally, New Zealand thanks the Secretariat for the preparation of the documents for this agenda item and the expert panel for its comprehensive work. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I now give the floor to China, followed by Japan. China, you have the floor. China? If you activate your microphone. Okay, I then continue with Japan and then come back to China. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. In our view, there are three important components of resource mobilization: redirecting away from and reducing resources that may cause harm to biodiversity, generating resources from all sources, and enhancing the efficiency and effectiveness of available resources use. We recognize that resource flows are highly influenced by national socio-economic circumstances, especially given the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Under today's uncertain global financial circumstances, we think that it is unrealistic to anticipate a continuous unfettered increase in global resource flows. For these reasons, we think that it is now critically important for all these three components to be reflected in the new framework. According to document 24/3, we note that Target 17 of the post-2020 framework addresses harmful incentives. Target 18 focuses on the overall increase in financial resources, but there is currently no target that addresses the third component, enhancing the efficiency and effectiveness of available resource use. In our view, it is critically important for this element to be also reflected in the new framework. In this regard, we have a suggestion for alternative text to add this point when considering paragraph 4 on page 12 of document 3/5, which we can share with all of you in writing through the Secretariat. We would like to support updating the strategy for resource mobilization as a way to deal with issues that may not have been fully reflected in the post-2020 framework. For example, we think that we should be addressing the issue of reducing the negative impact on biodiversity from certain kinds of private sector activities. Finally, we reject claims that the provision of financial resources should be in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention as mentioned in paragraph 5 on page 13 of the same document. This is because the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is a political target, in our view, and should not be written to imply as though the framework is legally binding. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. Distinguished delegates, it is now close to 10 a.m. and I would like to bring this session to a close for today. I have taken note of the parties that remain in the queue. Don't be worried, we know the list. So tomorrow we will continue with these interventions and we will come back to China tomorrow morning. I will call you one by one and give the floor in the order I have noted. The meeting is now adjourned until tomorrow. See you then.